welcome to the TEOCO podcast, where we discuss the intersection of telecom, technology, and innovation. Today, our focus is on 5G and the challenges the industry faces in taking it to the next level. My guest today is Dimitris Dernikas, who is a fellow in innovations and a senior director of technology evolutions at TEOCO. So welcome, Dimitris, and thank you for joining.
Nice to be here, Barbara.
So can you begin by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. I'm a fellow in the TEOCO innovations team with a specific role to assist in evolving our products towards 5G. I have been in the industry for more than 25 years, working in various roles, first in the academia, but then with TEOCO and ERCOM, developing and delivering optimization and planning capabilities. My background in radio, working over the years, was in designing and optimizing radio networks in all technologies, starting from 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G now. My specific focus right now is exactly to look at 5G and work with our customers, our suppliers, and academic partners to evolve our current capabilities and develop new solutions that will address those emerging 5G needs. This is really a topic that I'm quite excited because I've been involved in the industry for quite a long time, and I can see the benefits that it brings to the world. But I see 5G as this emerging technology that can bring even more change. It has the potential to really change the way we live and work in the near term.
Well, thanks for that, Dimitris. It sounds like you're the right person to have on our podcast today to talk about this subject. But about the subject of 5G, it feels honestly like we've been talking about it forever. Now things are finally kicking off, but I have to ask, just like a kid in the back seat on a long road trip, are we there yet?
Interesting question, and also a very difficult one to answer, especially when you know how the kids in the back seat behave. Look, in reality, the answer is probably not quite yet. Look, 5G is deployed around us, and it is available. Operators like T-Mobile, Verizon in the US, Vodafone 3 in the UK, amongst others, are having large-scale deployments. So from a technology point of view, 5G is here and it is working. However, and that's the butt of the conversation, at this stage, I feel the industry is finding it difficult to demonstrate the value of 5G, especially when it comes to what the user sees himself. What is different from the previous technologies? I think that that's something that the industry is struggling to demonstrate. I found very, very interesting a few months back a comment from Tariq Amin, the CTO of Rakuten, that was saying that the most popular app in 5G was speed testing. Clearly, that's not the app that you would want to focus on. And clearly, there's a lot of excitement, but with the users, not quite there yet.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we will get beyond speed testing apps. There should be more ahead for users of 5G. But my understanding is that a lot of the benefits are going to be realized by business customers, by enterprise, different verticals. What's the future of business going to look like under a 5G future?
The way people behave is like the early days of 3G, and where we were all wondering about what was at the time described as the killer app. People were looking at what was going to be the future beyond voice, and I think we're in a similar kind of point with 5G. We all know that something is going to be different, but it is not clear yet. At TEOCO, we have a slightly different perspective because we sort of recognize that the change is not about the handset or the device or the technology. It's more about what you do with it. clearly 5G is transformative technology, something that changes how people provide connectivity, and I think that potential is can touch everything in every industry. And I think, to be fair, the broader industry recognizes that, and they are trying to start looking at that. Um, I'm quoting from a study, a recent GSMA study, that asked operators about uh, when they were looking to launch industrial 5G services. And a very large number of them, about 60%, said within the next 2 years, which I think quite demonstrates how prepared people are to look at that area for the future. More so because I think that the operators themselves accept that a large proportion of their growth is going to come from these enterprise applications. I think, though, that the 5G reality is not going to be only driven by the operators themselves. I do expect that it will require a more collaborative development of these services, these user use cases that people were going to start seeing in their phones, almost to a large extent what we have seen with the smartphone. The smartphone came up and suddenly the environment changed completely. In TEOCO, we are very involved, for example, with working with operators to support their drone management systems, and that is an area that is going to be a big growth in. But it is very, very clear that while the solution needs to bridge the gap between the operator and the industry that actually uses it, that bridge is not quite there yet, and this is really where both sides of the partnership need to start working together. That on the one hand, operators do provide the reliable connectivity that the industry needs, but with the real-time information and with aviation-grade reliability that the users will mandate for that. And what I think is critical is that both sides need to recognize, facilitate, and assure this once they understand what the needs and the limitations of each other are. That my belief is that before we see any real progress, the industries needs to understand what are the capabilities of the technology, and at the same time, the operators need to understand what are the needs of the industry. And when that happens, you will have something that will mature quite quickly. But to get to that point, there's quite a lot of effort, both in terms of understanding what those needs are, how do you address them, what's the right model, and so on. And it is this that is necessary to really determine what's the full impact of 5G.
Right, right. So what do you think, who's going to benefit the most from this? What industries out there? You mentioned the drone industry, and that people are starting to look at 5G and think about it. Clearly you don't have a crystal ball, but what are your thoughts? What are you seeing out there?
Well, I see a lot of interest from enterprises in general, more so than in the past. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's a recognition that 5G is this transformative technology that will allow them to do things differently. I'm particularly interested to see what's going to happen as a result of the pandemic, because I certainly feel that the healthcare industry has become even more involved in understanding what connectivity means for them, not only with a specific response to the coronavirus with tracing and tracking and everything else, but also because I feel that the emergence of a pandemic accelerated the pace of adapting technologies and services, for example, for online consultations. Clearly, this is going to be something that is going to be even more important over time, and it's often you need some kind of this kind of sperm to change the way people work. And if I may, I also wanted to add one other thing that I've experienced over the last few months. And I think that this is an area that actually I think understands quite well the power of connectivity, and that is gaming. If you have children and you see how they interact playing Fortnite, you can immediately see almost like a community that wants to be connected with each other and do something together. I think that this is a very interesting area, especially if you consider the potential that it has in other areas, for example, education, which is also a topic that is very prominent these days. We're trying to get everyone back to school if possible, or actually facilitate their learning with other means.
Well, you raised some really good points there, especially as we're all, hunkered down in our homes and looking at new ways to use technology to help us still have those connections with people is so critical.
I genuinely
Yeah.
think that this connectivity requirement is what basically will make 5G almost immersive. And the example that I give with Fortnite, for example, I've seen my son getting himself immersed in this, and not by himself, by the way, with his friends, and
Right.
interact with each other. You can imagine a situation where they are doing all that in an augmented reality environment, doing something together, but not being together.
Yeah, so true. So what needs to happen really for the world to begin realizing this full potential? I feel like we're right at the cusp, going to almost touch it. Now that we've got starting to get the technology in place, it seems like there's still a bit of a gap. What needs to happen next?
Up to now, operators have been very, very good at providing connectivity for individuals. But when you are talking about creating applications that may require a certain level of performance, they need to start thinking about how they will assure their customers, their various industry verticals, that they will deliver what is needed.
One of the challenges, though, I think, is that today, there are 5G networks that have been launched, but there really aren't the standalone networks um, launched yet, which means a lot of the coolest capabilities, like network slicing, um, really aren't available yet. So, how do you communicate this to your business partners, and how do you start these wheels in motion before it even is a reality?
Some of these propositions are not necessarily going to be proven in the full 5G network as it exists now, but will be proven in incubation centers, in research projects that will demonstrate that something like this is possible, so that we know what we're trying to deliver, and then we can move it in the 5G network as soon as it has the right capabilities. And to close the loop, it will demonstrate what are the right capabilities that are needed from 5G, so that the operators understand that they are investing in something that will give them a return. Examples are numerous, and the one that I will draw is again this drone example. It is possible to demonstrate the capabilities without having the full 5G technology behind you. Let's face it, this is going to be a major issue for operators that want to support the various verticals that are going to exist. You can not be everything to the whole world. You have to make decisions about which way to go.
So as these decisions are really kind of shaping up, and as these business models are really getting fleshed out, do you get a sense that there's a pause on 5G deployments? And if so, how can we address operator hesitation? What can the industry do really as a whole to move things forward?
Look, again, there is there's the expected and the unexpected, and I still believe that most of the operators are very committed in 5G. They genuinely see this as the future. But what we are seeing is almost not necessarily a pause, almost like a small period of operators looking again about whether the direction that they were having prior to those changes is still the right one. And clearly that's necessary. Obviously, we are looking at an economic situation where the whole world has been severely impacted, and the loss of GDP is inevitably going to result in less revenue for the operators. It will be foolish for them not to do that. But I genuinely think that they can still see a future that is supported by 5G. What I think they are less clear is about how that brings value to their top line, and this is really where I've been arguing quite heavily that they need to understand what are the right services and service propositions, and as a corollary, the right additional network investments. I think that's something that perhaps is missing to really accelerate 5G. Again, I'll quote the GSMA report that says that about 70% of the industry says that they cannot see the business case for 5G over existing technologies. And I think that is almost like what stops senior executives that say, you know what, why should I invest in low latency? Why should I invest in cell edge computing? What do I get? And obviously that is a little bit of a chicken and an egg scenario. If you cannot see where the money is going to come from, you are a little bit more hesitant to invest in the right areas in the network, and therefore you are a little bit less able to support the needs of the verticals that require those. But I think inevitably through those collaborative projects, because most of the operators have this view that they can start looking at these new service propositions, we will be able to win the various services that are going to be required, and through those the development of those partnerships, we'll be able to start developing these use cases in tandem between both the operators and the enterprises that are making use of it.
So it looks like 5G partnerships are going to be different than in previous, 4G, 3G generations. And really with an eye towards developing these industrial use cases and designing private networks, less on the consumer side perhaps. So are things moving in this direction in a way that makes sense in your opinion?
Yes, and inevitably, I think that this will need to be accelerated further. I remember a discussion that I had with with an executive in an operator in the Middle East. He was arguing we are very good at providing consumer connectivity, but we are less good at understanding what the specific needs of various industries are. Enterprises and integrators will need to start engaging the operators in that sense to try to create these partnerships. It is about recognizing that there needs to be an understanding from the operator of what the industry needs to achieve, and that will need to turn into the right level of KPIs or the right service level, so that the operators recognize what they need to do in order to support them. We have been working with a couple of universities and a number of industrial partners and operators to try to determine, for example, very, very accurately what is the location of users, so that afterwards you can create service propositions on top, ranging from health to marketing, that actually allow you to refine what the users are seeing in various locations. I'm talking about indoor locations with an accuracy of under a few meters, because then you can actually create this environment in which you assure the network, because you can take measurements and know what the network gives you in those very accurate locations. But at the same time, you can create all sorts of weird and wonderful use cases like augmented reality, to provide something that is very specific to these locations.
So how do we take these academic discussions and really move them into practice? It sounds like it's just going to take an incredible amount of communication, really, within the entire ecosystem. So, as an industry, what are the questions that we need to be asking right now?
It can be a lot of work to have these conversations and create clear strategies that will work, but it's necessary. It needs to be done. We need to address these questions around what are the customer expectations, how they are going to be delivered, what is the impact in the network, what are the right technologies to deploy, what are the right business models, where the value is added, and how this value is being shared, and so on. Because if we don't answer that, then we are not going to have the investment that's required for this to happen. What I'm hopeful is that we are beginning to see an understanding that this is needed, both at the operator side and in the enterprise. From the point of view of the enterprise, if they found, for example, that the operator cannot give them that, they then can have a conversation about, okay, is that something that we need to do on our own? Do we need to deploy our own network within this shopping mall, because effectively it will pay itself. It has a viable business case, and then we can provide this kind of service propositions on top.
Yeah. So, are you seeing any really interesting use cases that are under development, and if so, who's working on these?
As TEOCO, we are very excited about certain areas. For example, the drones. One of the projects that I have mentioned that is really pushing quite fast forward is the emergence of drones as an alternative to support movement of materials within the real world. We are working quite hard with operators and the drone aviation industry to try to bridge the gap, as I mentioned. I think there are some very, very big initiatives there. You are beginning to see the collaboration between different parts of the value chain to create standards, and again, this is something that we are involved with, so that it is possible to deliver a full end-to-end capability that can be used either to support medical packages, or very simple, to bring a different way through which commercial packages can come to our houses. Again, something that has been vastly accelerated by the pandemic. But what I also think is critical is to see how governments and to a large extent local governments have picked up the benefits that 5G brings on a local level. And again, in the UK, we are seeing quite a few initiatives that bring local authorities that are actually beginning to take ownership of what is happening within their area, and certain infrastructure need to be put in place so that whoever wants can start deploying their own services on top. These are very exciting, and because of the transformative capability of 5G, the technology is there to support some of those initiatives going forward.
Yeah, good points. Excellent points. As they say, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And I think in this new COVID environment that we're in, there's going to be a lot of innovation coming out of this, and having the technology in place that will help spur that, clearly. So this has been fantastic discussion. Our time is at the end, but thank you, Dimitris, for your time today. I really appreciate your participation. As we close things off, if listeners would like to learn more about TEOCO's 5G use cases, drone solutions, anything on this topic, be sure to visit www.teoco.com. I hope you'd enjoyed our conversation today as much as I have. If so, please be sure to share with your colleagues and coworkers, and of course, follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter to get updates on future podcasts and other news. So lastly, if you have questions for Dimitris regarding today's discussion, or if there are any topics you'd like to hear about in the future, please be sure to send us an email to podcast@teoco.com. Thanks for joining, everyone, and until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and stay informed.